Hi chess fans, in this position black played bishop takes b2, and what can white play? Okay, it surely looks like the e7 square is weak, but it's defended by the knight on c6, so one candidate move surely is to take out this defender. And in this position, either play bishop attacks e7 or knight attacks e7. So bishop attacks the queen and the rook, but the queen can just move away. The queen can move to d7, and in this position white has not gained anything. So knight takes is a check, which is a more forcing move, but the king can just move away. So what to do? Well, when you calculate variations, always look for checks and see what happens. So it turns out if king g7, you have knight f5 check with a discovered attack on the queen and a check on the king. So if the king moves, white will win the queen and the game. And if after knight e7 check, king h8 check, we have a check on g6 as well. So if you calculate this variation and you give this check and you think, okay, the king just moves away and what have I gained? Always look for checks in the variations that you calculate. Okay, let's have a look at this position. Black played a3 and it's white to move. Okay, we always want to look at checks and takes and threats. So let's have a look at checks first. Rook h4 check. The king just moves to g8 and white hasn't gained much. Okay, what about rook g7 check? The king just moves up and white hasn't gained much. Okay, there's no takes, but there is a threat here, king f7, threatening rook h4 mate, and there's a forcing move. The king has to move up to h6, but what now? A check just gets the king, lets the king get out, and now black is even winning. And moving the king up just gets us to the same position. So, is there anything for white here? Okay, one thing that we can learn is to recognize a king's cage. So this rook and this knight are coordinating such that all of these squares are controlled. So the king is actually in a cage here. And at the moment, this square is controlled by the king on f7. So the only square that the king has is the h7 square. And actually white can play king g8, and now the king is controlling these squares, the knight and the rook continue to control these squares, and white is threatening mate, and there's nothing that black can do against it. So what we can learn from this position is to recognize when the opponent's king is in a cage. And the best that black can do is to take the knight, and white wins the game. Okay, in this position, black played knight e5, and what can white do to win? Okay, we want to look at checks, we want to look at takes, and we want to look at threats. So is there any check in this position? No, white cannot give any check. Is there any takes in this position? The only take in this position is knight to e6, but black simply takes, and white has not gained anything. Okay, so are there any threats in this position? So the squares around the king are kind of controlled by the bishop, so if we could check the king in the next move, it would be a mate. So knight e5 actually threatens to jump to e7 and give a checkmate. This is a threat. Okay, but what about rook e8? Okay, turns out white is also attacking the king on a5. So looking at this position, we realize there is the tactical liability of the king, having not so many squares, but also the tactical liability of the queen, which is a loose piece. And it turns out knight e5 threatens both mate and a discovery attack on the loose piece of the queen. And there's nothing that black can do to either get mated, sorry, of course not takes, but mate, to either get mated or otherwise to lose the queen. Okay, let's have a look at the next position. In this position, black played knight takes. And what can white do in this position? Okay, this is an example of a position where white has a very clear motive, which is rook takes. So the first thing we want to look at is rook takes check. Only move for the king is to move to g5, attacking the bishop. And so that didn't work. For example, white could now play protect this bishop, or give a check here. And the king will take the bishop, or white could protect this bishop, but then the knight simply exchanges itself. And there's nothing more that white can do, and black is winning because he has more pawns. So what to do? So one tool we can employ here is making motives work. Okay, so what does that mean? Making motives work. So one issue is that this knight in the variation that we saw could take this bishop, and another motive was that the king can escape on the dark squares. So let's just try to make this motive work. What if, for example, this rook just takes the knight? Okay, black has to retake, otherwise he's material down. And now check. We again try this motive, now without the knight here. We have sacrificed the exchange for the knight. Okay, but the king can still move to g5, attacking the bishop. And if we give a check, the king takes the bishop. So we want to protect the bishop. And now we're threatening mate here, or we're threatening a check here. But the king has this Luft square. Okay. So again, let's try to make this motive work. After rook takes, is there anything else that we can do? So the motive already almost works, just that the king can escape here. So what can we do to prevent the king from doing this? Yes, playing h4. Now white is finally threatening a mate on h7, and the king cannot move to the g5 square anymore. And if the king moves down to attack this pawn, we simply give a mate. And if black doesn't do anything, we also give a mate. So is there anything else that black can do? Maybe a check down after h4. Is there anything that black can do? Maybe a check here. But that basically doesn't lead anywhere. Another check, and then there are no checks available without black losing material. Okay, so essentially what white has done is, in the initial position, white has seen, okay, I got this motive here, but it doesn't work, so how can I make it work? After knight takes, first we take out the knight, and then we block the escape route, and we have made the motive work. Very useful tool. Okay, next position. In this position, white to move. First of all, black is material up. Black is a bishop up. So white has to do something, otherwise he will lose. Okay, what's going on in this position? One motive is that the queen is attacking the king, and this queen is attacked and pinned by the queen. So if this rook was not here, we could take out the queen. So can we do something to eliminate this rook? No, because the queen would just take the queen, and then black is winning. Can we do anything else? Is there a check? After this check, there's not much else we can do. What about this check? Same story, not much else that we can do. So what's in this position? Okay, so whenever a piece is pinned, one candidate move to think of is to attack the pinned piece. How can we attack this pinned piece? Well, rook c1 attacks the queen, and the point is that the queen cannot take this rook, because otherwise it would be check. Okay, so a candidate move to look at. So what can black do after rook to c1? White is now threatening to take the queen, so the queen has to move away, while not leaving the diagonal. Here it will be taken by the rook. Here it will also be taken by the rook. So queen takes is the only move, but then white can take and mate. So even though this is maybe a little bit hidden at first, whenever you recognize a pin, think about attacking the pin piece as a candidate move, and then just see what happens. Only move queen takes, and then you maybe see, oh, there's a second motive, mate. Okay, let's quickly recap. Looking for checks in your variations, like knight to f5 check here. Recognizing when the king is caged, and that suddenly gives you the resource king g8. If there are no checks and no takes, look for threats, like threatening mate with knight d5 here, which turns out to be a discovered attack on the queen as well. Making a motive work, like here, white really wants to play rook takes h7, and he goes to great lengths, taking the exchange h4 to make the motive work. And then lastly, whenever a piece is pinned, we can learn that it's a good candidate move to look at to attack the pinned piece. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.